This is test Angular like it was made out of JavaScript. My name is Zach. I work for TestDouble. My goal is to write my front-end JavaScript tests with minimum ceremony. In my mind, that means without framework-specific testing tools. Today we're going to be working on an Angular app that I'm calling Airstrike. It's a single-player battleship game where the player keeps blindly firing shots until the enemy fleet is sunk. The enemy fleet cannot fire back because the player doesn't have any ships of their own. Thus the name Airstrike. We've got a status here, fire control, and a tracking grid. That is this is a mock-up of what we'd like the game to look like. So far, we've only implemented a basic status that pops up before the first shot is fired, and we've hard-coded the app to return miss when any coordinates at all are fired. You can see in the template, this is the status area, and here's fire control. The controller just has the two methods, status and fire. We want to extract this logic from our Angular controller so we can test drive the rest of the app just using vanilla JavaScript objects and vanilla JavaScript testing tools without worrying about Angular. So let's get started on that. So we'll pop over to game spec. We'll describe Airstrike, bang, game. This first test always sucks. So I like to give myself permission to just get started by writing something awful that'll have to be deleted later. Let's make sure we've got a passing spec, and we do. We'll start by saying var game equals game just to get a loud bang. That's not going to do anything. Let's say new game. And game is not defined. That's because we have not defined game. So pop over here to game.js, and we'll start by writing an iffy. This protects the rest of our app from whatever we're doing inside of here. We'll keep ourselves strict. Make sure that our explosions are nice and loud when I screw something up. Here's the game constructor function. And we are still throwing an error, which makes sense because we are inside of the closure created by the iffy. So we'll pass in the global object. We'll call it root inside of the function to keep ourselves platform agnostic. It's called global in Nodeland. Say root.game equals that game constructor function. Pop back over here, and we are passing. Okay, so now we actually have to do a thing in our does a thing test. If we look at our game controller, we have two methods, status and fire. Let's start with fire, since that's the thing closer to the top of the page. And we'll say hash fire just to say we're testing the fire method. And let's just say game.fire. I'm not sure what result we want to see yet because we're not testing status. Fire doesn't really return anything since it's a command function, not a query function. Pop back over here to the game.js file. Say game.prototype.fire equals function coordinate. And we're passing. All right, so now we have a game. Now we have a fire method that doesn't actually do anything. We'll probably have to test that mostly through status But I like APIs that that return the object in question when a command is called. So we'll just test that for now. We're just testing that it returns itself. Create a nice fluent API. Expect undefined to be object. So let's say return this. And now we have a testing pass, a passing test even. All right, we know that status is going to return multiple things because it says you may fire when ready here and miss there. So let's create a context function. Text status. We'll even throw that little hash there. Okay. I want to go through all of the major cases and just kind of get them out in front of me so so I can reason through them more clearly. Is a default I think it's important to specify that we're talking about the last shot here. Shows hit bang when the last shot hit. That was a typo. Just want to make sure I explicitly state that. And we also need to know when the player won. Player can know when they won. And I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, so we'll keep it a little bit vague. Okay, so we can get this one passing fairly easily here. Expect game.status to be you may fire when ready. And we are failing because game is not defined, which makes sense because game has not been defined in that has not been defined in that function. So we'll throw a before each here. And I'm not going to, I don't want to throw it on this because typing this all the time in here is going to become a bummer. So we'll just throw it in the scope var game equals null. And in the before each, we'll new it up. Game equals new game. And we've got one passing and one failing. Let's make sure this one's still passing. All right, undefined is not a function. That is the right failure to see. So popping back over to game.js, game.prototype.status equals function. It's not returning anything yet, or it's returning undefined. Expected undefined to be you may fire when ready. So return you may fire when ready. And two tests are now passing. Okay, we can get this one to pass for now. If there's a random aspect to our game, we will probably have to refactor this test later. Expect game.fire a1.status. We can chain because we're returning game from fire to be miss bang. I'm being inconsistent with my quotes there. All right, you may fire when ready to be miss. Okay, we already have this implemented, so I'm going to steal that. last shot is not defined. This dot last shot, we'll set this dot last shot to null in the constructor. And you may fire when ready to be miss, which is the case because we're not actually doing anything in fire. So this dot last shot equals coordinates. So everything should be passing, and it is, which is good. And now we have a mirror implementation, which means we can take our game and throw it on the scope. So instead of calling status here, I want to call game.status. And instead of calling fire there, I want to call game.fire. Popping back over to the front end. This is still working, which means we can take the guts of our controller and delete them. And everything here is still working. All right, we've pretty much refactored the everything out of our controller that's important, which means we can test drive the rest of this functionality without having to worry about Angular, except for when we have to worry about the details of exactly how to render portions of our game on the screen, which is the only time I actually want to worry about the framework that's designed for displaying stuff to a screen, which I think is pretty cool. But this might be too much Angular for you still. So we're going to switch to a syntax called controller as. Here we say game controller is game, and instead of scope.newGame equals new game, we're going to just return a new game. And that's erroring because I forgot to save the template like I always do. And now we have this working again. So the only thing our controller is now doing is returning a new instance of game, which means we can take the ng controller directive, and instead of pointing it towards the game controller, we can now point it towards our game constructor. And it's still working. So we can take this whole file and delete it. So we have completely refactored the Angular code out of our quote-unquote Angular app. But I find that this is a little bit dangerous in actual production code because I need a place to wire pieces of the framework together. If I needed an HTTP call in here, I might be tempted to put that in my domain object directly, which is a bit dangerous. So my preference is to actually keep that scope syntax instead of the newer controller as syntax, and not point my my ng controller directives directly at my domain objects, which gives me a nice convenient place to grab, say, the HTTP service from, or the Q service, or my cool custom service. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching.